There's something unsettling about standing alone in a lighthouse at 2 a.m., surrounded by nothing but crashing waves and miles of darkness. The wind screams against the cliffs. The fog rolls in without warning. And sometimes, the rules you're given don't make sense until it's too late. Tonight's story: I'm a caretaker at Point Sur Lighthouse in California. There are strange rules. Is 100% true, verified through public records and witness accounts. Names may be changed for privacy, but the events you're about to hear are completely real. If you love grounded psychological horror, take a moment to like. Your like helps this story reach more horror lovers like you. Comment where you're watching from. You're part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's watching from. And tell me which part hit you the hardest. Subscribe, because your support fuels this channel to bring even more terrifying true stories. My name is Eric Lawson, and by the time I took the caretaker job in the Appalachian Mountains, I had already learned how to live by strange rules. The lighthouse on the California coast was my last steady job. Overnight shifts, salt wind, isolation. A typed sheet of instructions taped inside the maintenance room. Most of it was practical. Lock the gate at sunset. Log every visitor. Check the foghorn twice. But one line had always stayed with me. If you see someone on the lower cliff trail after 11 p.m., do not approach them. Do not use the radio. Stay inside the tower. I told myself it was about liability. Trespassers wandering too close to the edge. People looking for trouble. Until the night I saw him. Heavy fog had swallowed the coastline. Visibility barely 30 feet. I was halfway through my second perimeter check when I noticed a shape below the warning sign on the cliff trail. A person standing still, no flashlight, no phone glow, just a silhouette against the gray. I reached for my radio instinctively. Then I remembered the rule, so I stayed inside. The next morning, when I checked the security log, there was an entry already written in my handwriting. 2347. Subject observed at lower trail. Did not engage. The ink was still wet. I don't remember writing it. I left that job 3 weeks later. Now I live in a rented cabin outside a small Appalachian town called Damascus. The mountains here are softer than cliffs but feel heavier somehow. The fog doesn't roll in from the ocean. It rises from the hollow valleys and sits between the trees like breath held too long. The cabin smells like wet wood and something faintly metallic. The floorboards dip near the center, and when it rains, the walls exhale a deep, earthy scent of rot and old smoke. There's a narrow porch overlooking a slope of tangled brush that falls into a shallow ravine. I took this job because I wanted quiet. The listing said, seasonal property caretaker. Minimal oversight. Check the property twice a week. Keep trespassers off the land. Log anything unusual. There's a small laminated sheet tacked beside the door. Most of it is simple. Secure all windows before dark. Do not allow hikers to camp on the property. Keep exterior lights off after midnight. The last rule isn't bolded, but it feels heavier than the rest. If you see someone near the lower tree line after 11 p.m., do not approach. Do not call out. Remain inside. I stared at that line for a long time. It isn't the same rule, but it feels like it. The first few nights were uneventful. Wind sliding through branches. The occasional coyote cry echoing down the hollow. Once, I heard something large move through leaves beyond the porch light. Probably a deer. Then on the fourth night, the fog settled thick and low. Around 11:42 p.m., I stepped onto the porch to lock the outer shed. The air was damp and cold against my skin. Mist blurred the tree line at the bottom of the slope. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the last visible trunk. Still, no flashlight, no movement. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the lighthouse. I told myself it was a trick of the fog, a tree stump, a branch, but the shape was upright, human. I stepped back inside without realizing I'd made the decision. My hands felt cold and slightly numb as I locked the door. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't call the property owner. I just sat in the dark, staring through the window. The shape didn't move. After maybe 10 minutes, or maybe longer, the fog shifted. The tree line cleared slightly, and it was gone. The next morning, I checked the property logbook kept in the kitchen drawer. There was already an entry written, 2347. Subject observed at lower tree line. Did not engage. My handwriting, same slant, same uneven pressure on the letters. The ink hadn't fully dried. I stood there staring at it, trying to remember walking to the drawer, trying to remember picking up the pen. I don't remember. And that's what unsettles me most. Not the figure, not the rule, but the fact that part of me might be following instructions I don't consciously recall reading. That night, I moved the logbook into the bedroom. I wanted to see if it would move on its own. I wanted proof that this wasn't just stress catching up with me. But deep down, as the fog began rising from the valley again, I wasn't sure which answer would feel worse. I stayed awake the next night. I made coffee around 10:30 and kept every light in the cabin off except a small lamp near the couch. The fog thickened outside until the trees looked like smudges of charcoal against wet glass. At 11:41 p.m., I felt it before I saw it. That same tightness in my chest. The sense of being observed. I didn't move to the window immediately. I waited, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of cooling wood in the walls. At 11:47, I checked the clock. My stomach dropped. I hadn't looked outside yet, but I already knew. When I finally pulled the curtain back slightly, the figure was there again. Same distance, same posture. Still watching. This time I paid attention to details. The shoulders seemed slightly uneven. The head angled forward, not upright. No visible clothing details. Just a darker shape against grey mist. I forced myself to stay at the window longer than I wanted to. 5 minutes passed. The figure didn't shift weight, didn't sway, didn't step, just stood. My mind started trying to solve it logically. A trespasser testing the property. A local playing a prank. Someone trying to intimidate the new caretaker. But why never approach? Why never move? At exactly midnight, the fog thickened suddenly, like breath blown across glass. When it cleared again, the tree line was empty. I exhaled without realizing I'd been holding it. Then I remembered the logbook. It was still in my bedroom. I walked down the narrow hallway slowly, floorboards creaking under each step. The air felt heavier, almost humid. The logbook lay on the nightstand where I'd left it, closed. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. There was a new entry. 2347. Subject observed. Maintained distance. Did not engage. The ink was darker this time. Fresh, my hands started to shake slightly. Not violently, just enough to blur the words. I checked my palms. No ink stains. I tried to replay the last hour in my head. Every movement, every thought. There was a gap. A stretch of time between 11:42 and 11:50 that felt thinner, like a page missing from a book. I don't drink. I don't take medication. I've never blacked out before. The next morning, I walked down to the lower tree line. The mud was soft from constant dampness. My boots sank slightly with each step. Near where the figure had stood, I found impressions, not fresh footprints, but older ones, layered, overlapping, as if someone had stood in the same spot repeatedly, night after night. The shape of the prints matched my boot size. I crouched and placed my foot beside one. Same length, same tread pattern. I stepped back slowly. It's possible I'd walked down here before and forgotten. Possible that stress from the lighthouse job followed me here. Possible that I'm the one standing at the tree line, testing the rules, watching the cabin, seeing if I'll break them. I haven't left yet, but I've stopped checking the window at night. And sometimes, when the fog rises and the clock creeps toward 11:47, I feel an odd pull towards the door, a quiet urge to step outside and walk downhill, to stand in that exact spot and wait. I don't know if there's ever been anyone else out there. What unsettles me most is the possibility that there doesn't need to be, because the rule doesn't say the figure is a stranger. It only says not to approach. And lately, I'm not sure which side of the window I belong on. My name is Daniel Reyes, and I used to work rotating overnight shifts as a caretaker at Point Sur Lighthouse on the California coast. The ocean was loud, restless, always moving. After I left that job, I told myself I needed quiet. That's how I ended up in the Appalachian Mountains, renting a weathered cabin outside a small town near the Tennessee border. The listing called it remote but peaceful. It sits at the bottom of a narrow gravel road that dips into a hollow valley where fog lingers until late morning. The trees crowd close to the structure, their trunks dark with moisture, their branches leaning in like they're listening. The cabin smells like damp pine and old ash. When it rains, the scent of rot swells from the floorboards. The wood stove ticks softly at night as it cools. There's a narrow porch overlooking a steep slope that drops into a rocky creek bed. You can hear water moving down there, even when you can't see it. I thought the mountains would feel different from the ocean, but isolation has the same weight anywhere. At the lighthouse, there had been a rule posted in the maintenance room. If the foghorn sounds when there is no fog, report it, but do not investigate the cliffs. The first time it happened, the sky was perfectly clear. No marine layer, no ships on radar. The horn sounded at exactly 2:13 a.m., vibrating through the tower and into my chest. It happened again the next night, same time. When I checked the old incident binder, I found similar entries going back decades. Clear skies, 2:13 a.m. The final note on the most recent report read, previous caretaker insisted someone was walking below the cliff when it sounded. Employment terminated. On my third night after reading that, I looked down from the railing at 2:13. I didn't see anyone clearly, but I heard footsteps on the rocks below. Slow, deliberate. I never proved anything. I just left. Now in this cabin, I thought I'd escaped the rhythm of that hour. The first week passed quietly. Wind through trees, the distant call of owls. Occasionally something larger moving through brush at the edge of the clearing. Then, on the fifth night, I woke up suddenly. The room was dark except for faint moonlight leaking around the curtains. I checked my phone. 2:13 a.m. And from somewhere outside the cabin, I heard a low mechanical groan. Not loud, not sharp, but steady. It reminded me of the foghorn. I held my breath and listened harder. The sound faded after a few seconds, then silence. I told myself it was wind moving through the narrow valley, maybe a branch rubbing against the side of the cabin. The next night it happened again. 2:13 a.m. That same low vibration, almost like distant machinery, humming. I stepped onto the porch this time. The air was clear, no fog, just cold mountain silence and the faint rush of water in the creek below. The trees stood perfectly still. The sound seemed to come from down the slope, from the rocks. My stomach tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the lighthouse railing beneath my hands. Inside the cabin, I found a small wooden drawer in the kitchen I hadn't opened before. Inside was an old binder left by the property owner. Maintenance notes, plumbing repairs, wildlife sightings. I flipped through it casually at first, then I noticed a pattern. 3 separate entries over the past 15 years. Low mechanical noise from creek bed. 2:13 a.m. clear weather. Sound repeated, no visible source. Tenant reported footsteps on rocks below porch. Lease not renewed. The handwriting changed over the years, but the time was always the same, 2:13. I closed the binder slowly. The cabin felt smaller after that. The walls seemed to press inward slightly, like damp cardboard softening under pressure. That night, I set an alarm for 2:10 a.m. If there was a sound, I wanted to be fully awake for it. When the alarm vibrated, I was already staring at the ceiling. The room was silent. At 2:13 exactly, the low hum began again. Longer this time, not loud enough to shake anything, just enough to feel in my ribs. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, the sound of something stepping carefully across loose stones. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't grab a flashlight. I just stood there in the dark, listening. Because I already knew what the rule at the lighthouse had taught me. Sometimes you're told not to investigate for a reason. And sometimes the reason isn't what you expect. The following night, I broke my own rule. I don't know if it was stubbornness or guilt, maybe both. At 2:12 a.m., I was already standing by the door, boots on, flashlight in hand. The cabin air felt damp and metallic, like rain even though the sky had been clear all day. The hum started right on time, low, vibrating. It seemed to roll up from the creek bed and settle against the porch floorboards. Then came the footsteps, slow, measured, not scrambling like an animal, placed. I stepped outside before I could talk myself out of it. The slope down to the creek was slick with mud. Leaves clung to my boots. The beam of my flashlight cut through darkness in a narrow tunnel of pale light. The sound stopped as soon as I reached the bottom. The rocks near the water were uneven and slick. The creek itself was shallow but fast-moving, whispering over stone. I scanned the area carefully. No one. No broken branches. No shifting shadows. But near the edge of the water, I noticed something unnatural. A long, rusted metal pipe half buried in mud, running along the bank. It disappeared beneath the cluster of stones. When I moved closer, I realized it wasn't just lying there. It was connected to something. A small old mechanical housing, partly submerged in the creek bed. My chest tightened. I crouched down and brushed away mud with my hand. The metal was cold and slick. Inside the housing, a small motor sat mounted to a stone base, a timer switch. I stared at it for a long time before I understood. The timer was set, 2:13 a.m. every night. The low hum wasn't mysterious, it was mechanical. Water passing through the pipe created that deep resonant tone. The motor activated briefly at 2:13, shifting a valve that altered the flow. The sound traveled up the hollow, echoing strangely through the valley. It could have been installed years ago, maybe by a previous owner experimenting with irrigation, maybe as a crude alarm system. But that didn't explain the footsteps. I stood slowly and turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. The flashlight beam trembled slightly in my grip. That's when I saw the impressions. Footprints in the damp soil near the mechanical housing, fresh, deep, leading from the tree line down to the creek, then back up again. Someone had been standing here, watching the timer activate, listening to the sound. The realization came slowly. Maybe the previous tenants hadn't imagined footsteps. Maybe someone local knew about the device. Maybe someone liked the sound it made, the pattern, the predictability. I followed the prints halfway up the slope until they blended into scattered leaves. I didn't call the police. I didn't dismantle the device. Instead, I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table until sunrise. The next morning, I searched the binder again. At the very back, tucked into a plastic sleeve, was a loose sheet of paper, a hand-drawn diagram of the creek bed, a note scribbled beneath it. Sound carries farther than you think. Good way to see who comes looking. No signature, no date, just that sentence. I don't know who installed it. I don't know if the footsteps I heard belonged to someone checking the timer or someone checking me. I disabled the device that afternoon, cut the wiring, removed the timer. The next night at 2:13, there was no hum, no mechanical vibration. But I still woke up. And for a moment, just a brief quiet moment, I thought I heard something moving across the rocks below. Slow, deliberate, as if someone had grown used to the sound and was disappointed it hadn't come. I left the cabin a week later. Even now, whenever I wake up around 2:13, I hold my breath and listen. Sometimes the silence feels heavier than the hum ever did. And I still don't know which is worse. A machine set to call someone down into the dark, or the fact that someone might have been waiting there all along.